Hello, everybody, and welcome to this launch of Horizon Europe in the United States. We're really delighted to have participants joining us from across 40 states of the United States and many also from Europe. So good morning to all of those of you in the United States and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from Europe. My name is Mary Kavanagh. I'm the Minister Councillor for Research and Innovation at the European Union's delegation to Washington, D.C. And it's a pleasure and an honour for me to be your moderator today. Horizon Europe is the European Union's framework programme for research and innovation. It's a 7-year programme with a budget of $116 billion. So as you can imagine, we won't be able to go into full detail of everything that's happening in Horizon Europe and that will happen in Horizon Europe over the next 7 years. But what we hope to do today is to give you an overview and perhaps to whet your appetite for collaboration with European researchers going forward and perhaps even consider spending part of your career in Europe. We have a stellar cast of speakers this morning, whom I will introduce to you as the morning goes on. They all have had wonderful careers, and I will only be able to indicate some of the highlights of their careers when I'm introducing them in the interests of time, but of course you have all received the full bios when you're registered. One small housekeeping event. At the end of the event this morning, there will be a very short, very brief audience survey, which we would be very happy if you would complete. It will help us to understand and to learn about your experience of today's event. That will be at the very end of the of this morning's events, and I'll remind you of that again later. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker this morning, Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis. Ambassador Lambrinidis is the European Union's ambassador to the United States. He has had an extraordinary career, and some of the highlights were being the Foreign Minister of Greece. Prior to coming here to the United States, he was the European Union Special Representative on Human Rights, and he was also formerly Vice President of the European Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Stavros, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mary. Good morning, everyone. It is really great to be here to open this event, launching Horizon Europe in the United States. First, I want to extend a warm welcome to our guests who are joining us in great numbers from 40 states across the country, as Mary mentioned. Frankly, you are a testimony to the great partnership and to the great potential for cooperation that exists between our scientific communities across the Atlantic. When we are fully reopened, however, I cannot wait to meet everyone in person. Dear friends, I'm extremely proud of the work that we are doing here in the United States to deepen our connections in the areas of science, without which we could not have found an exit to the current pandemic, frankly. The EU is strong in science. It would be no exaggeration, perhaps, to say that it's a science powerhouse. With only 7% of the world's population, we account for almost 20% of global R&D expenditure and 1/3 of high-quality scientific publications worldwide. Now, as a EU ambassador here in the country, I am, of course, as you can imagine, familiar with many European programs, and naturally they're all great. But I have to say that the research and innovation programs are truly exceptional. Although they account for only about 10% of the total EU spending on research and innovation, well, they have an extraordinary levering effect within Europe and internationally with our partners. I see Horizon Europe as a driver for US-EU cooperation for the global good. I see it as a bridge to a new generation of challenges, opportunities, and scientists. And I see it as a reflection and a multiplication of our values. Now, I'm very proud that Horizon Europe, because it will play a key role in solving global challenges, increasing our competitiveness, and developing researchers' careers, can play such an important role to the global good. And it is open to the world. Horizon Europe is the latest in a series of programs that over several decades have promoted cooperation between the European research teams and with international partners to tackle big research questions that require many times of expertise. That's the whole point. Coming out of the pandemic, there is added impetus, it goes without saying, to ensure that our future is sustainable. I am proud to add that the EU leads in scientific publications targeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, with 84% of the investments in the previous framework program relating to at least one of the SDGs. We have similar expectations for Horizon Europe. Some examples of research that European scientists have undertaken with US partners in our previous programs are awe-inspiring. From mapping the Atlantic Ocean floor to developing standards for autonomous vehicles and novel personalized medicine approaches for people with multiple sclerosis. I also said that Horizon Europe is a bridge to a new generation of opportunities, challenges, and people. It will help us tackle the major challenges of our time, the green and digital transitions needed to combat climate change, and the successful exit from the COVID-19 pandemic. In this, the European priorities are well aligned with the priorities of the US administration, so we can expect, honestly, continued cooperation between our scientists and innovators, if not increased cooperation. Very importantly, Horizon Europe will also continue to provide many opportunities for researcher mobility between the EU and the US through the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions and the European Research Council. These exchanges will fuel the development of new ideas and innovative solutions to global challenges. The mobility of young researchers, in particular, will lay the foundations for future transatlantic partnership. I look forward to this. Dear friends, people-to-people relations, whether it's in the scientific community, the political community, the NGO community, they have made this relationship, the EU-US relationship, the biggest and strongest in the world. We're getting out of COVID. Let's get people together and let's get the younger generations to meet with each other. That is our future. And finally, I said that Horizon Europe for me is an opportunity to reflect and to multiply our values. Now, no surprise to you, the EU believes that free exchange of ideas and co-creation of solutions are essential to the pursuit of knowledge and are key components of a vibrant innovation ecosystem. The EU and the US share research values of openness, transparency, fairness, inclusiveness, academic freedom, and ethics, as shared values of human dignity, of individual rights, and democratic principles make us natural partners to harness rapid technological change. Think about it this way, there's a lot of discussion about the challenges presented by the Chinese model, both of the economy and of governance, and rightly so. But if there's a silver bullet here, in my view, it is first and foremost for Europeans and Americans to run faster than China, or anyone else for that matter, to invest in, to research, and to develop faster the technologies of the future, ensuring that those technologies have baked in the values that we jointly believe, live by, advocate. Now, let me close by saying that you will hear the insights today from the top brass, frankly, responsible for Horizon Europe in the European Union, Director General Paquet and his team. I hope this event will launch 1,000 collaborations in the coming years. Faced with the challenges of our time, cooperation and creativity, especially scientific, social, and technological, are the bedrock of peace and prosperity for all. So thank you very much, and enjoy the morning. And Mary and all the team here at the EU Embassy in Washington, congratulations once again.
Well, Stavros, good morning. It's a pleasure to join you and join Mary as well in this launch event in the United States of Horizon Europe. And indeed, I am here together with my senior management team, nearly complete, which I think is a testimony of indeed the very intense cooperation which exists between institutions, between also administrations in the US and in the European Commission, supported by research and innovation, and in particular by the European framework programs. Science has been at the heart of the responses to pandemic. I must say I'm particularly proud to say that European science was decisive. European science allowed the BioNTech vaccine, sometimes known also I think as the Pfizer vaccine in the United States, to be developed in less than a year on the basis of messenger RNA, a technology used also by other companies in the US and in Europe. But science and also open science, having shared genome sequencing from the outset, having shared also research results and data on a very large scale, including with the COVID-19 platform run by the EMBL here in Europe, but used globally, and I know also by US partners. All this has allowed science to play a major role in the exit from the pandemic, and it will, as you said, Ambassador, also play a key role in our recovery, and particularly a recovery which would allow our continents, which would allow Europe to transform into a green continent and indeed into a digital continent in the next decade and after. Horizon Europe is a platform to contribute to that broader objective of science, research and innovation. Before I say a few words on the program itself, which will be presented in more detail in the course of the morning, let me underline that, of course, research and innovation in Europe is more than the framework program. This is largely a shared endeavor between European level instruments and what our EU member states are doing at national level, sometimes together as well. And the framework program represents a little less than 10% of science and research public funding in Europe. So there is, of course, much more than the framework program. There are many cooperations between universities in the US and in Europe which are bilateral, which I think are very welcome. Many scientists are traveling to the US, and increasingly many scientists are also coming to Europe with Marie Skłodowska-Curie, but also on the basis of these national programs. So the partnership is historic and is indeed, as you said, Ambassador, based on shared values politically, but also shared values on how science should be carried out and how science should serve society. And that's the context against which Horizon Europe has been prepared over the last 3 years. And today's event is particularly timely. The program legal framework was entered into force on the 12th of May. And the bulk of the work programs announcing the research topics is now expected in a couple of weeks. So we are really here in Europe launching the program. And it is therefore particularly important that all you here in the US have a good sense of how the program has developed. I mean, you will see there a number of similarities with Horizon 2020, in which you are participating as the first third country partner of Europe. There are a number of similarities. There are also a number of changes, which I hope you will retain from the discussions and presentations this morning, allowing you to look at that program, not just as a source of funding, but as a platform to engage in this common science endeavor, this global science endeavor, where Europe and the United States, I think, need to lead around our shared values. The program is essentially a program which deals with science, curiosity-driven research, science infrastructures, mobility of researchers. It's a program which is also, in fact, the bulk of the funding is on applied research to support member states, to support industry, to allow the green and digital transformation to be accelerated. And it is now more than ever, it's not a complete novelty, but it's much more visible and much better resourced than in the past. It's about innovation, in particular with the setting up of the European Innovation Council. So these three main areas of the program, I think, are pretty traditional. And we are, of course, hoping with that European program to add value, structure, the research, the applied research, and the innovation happening across EU member states, and of course increasingly also with those countries which decide to associate themselves to Horizon Europe and to this European research area. So on science, I don't think I should say a lot on the European Research Council. It's very well known in the US. It's many of you which are seeking grants under the European Research Council and are therefore joining at least part-time an EU institution, EU research institution, to carry out that research. I think it's a particularly powerful bridge to science systems. And the European Research Council, now a bit more than 10 years old, Angela will say it in a moment, we just celebrated the 10,000 grantee of the European Research Council. I sometimes call it the European Nobel Prize Factory. Of course, there's a little bit of lead time sometimes between a discovery and a Nobel Prize. I need to factor that in, but we are funding very many Nobel Prize winners, and we have now increasingly a connection between the research funded by the European Research Council and the best or most impactful or amazing scientific discoveries. I think maybe I should just note, but I'm sure that most of you listening in know that the European Research Council was also inspired by the National Science Foundation. We try to take the best of the NSF at the time, and I hope that NSF and ERC would both agree that there are two lighthouses of fundamental research and disruptive science, and it's no accident that the European Research Council is funding this company, BioNTech, in fact, the founder of the company, Ugur Sahin, of BioNTech. And so it's an ERC grant, which has, amongst others, allowed the messenger RNA technique to be so quickly repurposed for COVID-19. So out of very fundamental research, amazing, and in this case, extremely fast applications can arise as well. We will continue with Marie Skłodowska-Curie to also promote the mobility of scientists. We believe that Europe's strength is in its diversity. We have 27, and if you take associated countries, quite a few more research and innovation systems, with maybe not 27, but several different science cultures. And I think this is a distinct advantage, and therefore very important that we allow our young researchers in particular, as they build up their career, to benefit from this diversity and expose themselves to other research cultures. And it's an instrument of the program which is much used also by fellows in the United States. So another key bridge of our joint science efforts. And lastly, the science pillar of Horizon Europe is about research infrastructures. I think we don't speak about research infrastructures politically enough. They are absolutely essential. In COVID-19, as I said, the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, EMBL, was at the heart of the response in many aspects of the key life science response to COVID-19. They operated this open science cloud for COVID-19. And there are, of course, many examples where research infrastructures are not just science service providers. They really are setting the research agenda. And in the context of the green transformation in particular, the knowledge which will be generated by many international infrastructures is going to be absolutely key. So we will continue to invest jointly with our member states in these infrastructures. And the program is about allowing access to the infrastructure of scientists in Europe, but also scientists from around the globe. The bulk of the program is, as I said earlier on, applied research, aiming at accelerating Europe's green and digital transformation. I don't think I need to tell you as an audience how wicked a problem the climate and environmental challenges are. There are many trade-offs, many systemic connections which need to be made. And here again, research and innovation is particularly well positioned to provide the needed knowledge for these wicked problems. And of course, also technologies, but not just technologies. We're also trying more than ever in Horizon Europe to provide also a space, funding in the context of specific projects for platforms for social innovation, because the green transformation is not just about technology, it's also about changing our societies, it's about creating a desire of our citizens to change, to allow to deal with the urgency of the climate and biodiversity challenges humanity is confronted with. So you will see in this part of the program a particular effort to deal with these green and digital transformations, and with one rather interesting novelty. It's not unique, but we pushed it to maybe another level, at least here in Europe. We have structured that part of the program not around specific sectors, but around cross-cutting clusters. So we have, for example, a cluster on transport, energy, and climate. Within that cluster, certainly you will have mobility-related research or clean energy solutions emerging, but we will try as often as possible, because of the need for systemic solutions, to really work across these areas, propose topics which allow research teams to propose solutions across these areas. We have another cluster around industry, digital, and space, and one around agriculture, environment, nature, and the oceans, which here also I expect is going to be quite impactful in this systemic setup of the cluster. Of course, this part of Horizon Europe also has a degree of continuity, and I would like here in particular to highlight the health cluster of the second pillar, which is very well funded, and where traditionally US scientists and European scientists have been working a lot together, and there is an old agreement which we expect to continue now with Horizon Europe between the NIH and ourselves, under which a US partner, if participating in a European project, would be funded by the program. This is the exception. We don't fund third country participants, except if they come from developing countries. But in the case of health, we do. And the same then goes for the NIH, which would then also fund a European team or scientist which would participate in an AIH call and project. So that's, I think, quite an interesting example. Let's see if there is appetite to maybe replicate it a bit beyond health, but the rather amazing cooperation will no doubt continue. Notably, I expect on cancer, there's the American Cancer Moonshot, which we are well aware of. I hope you're also aware that under Horizon Europe there is a cancer mission as well, and we also have the European Beating Cancer Action Plan. So here again, the agendas are much aligned, both in terms of health and public policies, but also, I think, in terms of the research agenda. So a lot of space to work very closely together in that pillar. And I think that's an important development, which I must say I'm quite excited about, as you will find out in a second, is the Horizon Europe missions. I just mentioned the mission on cancer. We agreed to carry out, inspired, of course, by the Man on the Moon mission philosophy. We decided to embark in 5 missions, one on cities, one on oceans, one on soils, one on climate adaptation, and one on cancer. So these missions will be, in terms of the research, supported under Horizon Europe. I hope they will also aggregate additional resources coming from the national level in Europe. And the purpose of these missions is not just to carry out research, but the purpose of the mission is to set out an extremely concrete objective and then aim at delivering that outcome in society. So we are now in the last few weeks before we finalize the implementation plans for these missions, but the objectives have been set already by mission boards in the last 12 months. We would aim at having 100 European cities climate neutral by 2030, a very tall order, where, of course, technology and social innovation will be key, but where very obviously getting to climate neutrality is not about research primarily. It's about using research outcomes, solutions out of research, and then implementing them at local and city level in public policies to ensure that you have a deployment of these solutions and that you bring also your society along. In soils, we aim at restoring the health of our European soils up to 75%. This is also extremely ambitious and will require a lot of buy-in, in particular from our agricultural sector, but not only. In the case of climate adaptation, we want to showcase the possibility of having 200 regions in Europe which would be climate resilient by 2030. I mean, particularly investing in nature-based solutions, which of course also to an extent deal with adaptation, but also mitigation. So an interesting synergy here. And then on cancer, the objective set is 3 million less deaths from cancer in Europe. And this is indeed a combination of research, drug developments, but also very much an issue of health policy, of cancer prevention, early prevention and detection, and essentially an issue of public health. So in all these missions, as you can see, we are connecting knowledge and outcomes of research with then deployment and public policy impact across Europe. So we are moving, if you want, a little bit, it's quite an interesting experiment, I would argue, because we are, with that, demonstrating that research and innovation is not just happening in labs or in companies, but that you can use and really give direction to research and innovation to achieve these very concrete outcomes. So we very much hope that these missions will be high profile and will indeed allow Europe to make progress in all these areas which are at the heart of public expectations in Europe. In this pillar, and I finish with that, we of course also have a number of industry partnerships and partnerships with member states. I mean, a very wide range of areas from biodiversity down to bio-based solutions, aviation, automated driving. So 49 different partnerships, which for some of them must be known to you. So these partnerships will also aim at being very targeted, high impact efforts to allow solutions to be emerging early on and be then deployed. And let me give you here the example of aviation. We have discussed over the last 2 years now with the aviation industry, and we agreed that whatever happens, we need by 2035 a range of aircrafts which allows to move towards carbon neutrality also for aviation. Biofuels will not do it in isolation. You need new technologies. And the air transport industry in Europe, with member states and the European Commission, is now engaging in this Clean Aviation Partnership. And we hope that in the next 7 years, research will develop these range of aircrafts, electric, hydrogen, clean fuels as well, with then deployment possible in the 30s. So that's really an example connecting, I hope visibly, the green transformation with what Horizon Europe can provide. And then last, and I finish with that, is innovation. I mean, there is this idea that Europe is very strong on science. The ambassador said it early on, and I can only confirm it. I think we are a science powerhouse. I mean, depending on the metrics, I think there are very strong similarities between the US system and the European one. But then the saying goes that whilst that is the case, on innovation we are lagging behind. So I mean, this is historically probably correct, but I think what I want to say here is that things have changed a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. And I would argue that not just with Horizon Europe, but also with the European Innovation Council, Europe is now equipping itself to be a key player of the next innovation wave, which I think experts, but certainly here in Europe, we expect to be around deep tech, connecting the physical world with the digital in synthetic biology, for example. I mean, AI is obviously another area with many applications. And we have, therefore, in Europe, this strong science base. And we believe that we can turn this now into very real and impactful innovations. We are creating the European Innovation Council for that purpose. complementing a lot of setups and schemes at national and local level. My data tells me that we are creating more startups every year than anyone else in the world. The challenge is obviously that they grow and grow faster and in Europe, but the problem is not so much the initial stage, and that's a testimony to investments done by many universities, regional authorities, also industry, absolutely everywhere in Europe. So that initial stage of the innovation process and of connecting increasingly science with innovation is already happening. And so the challenge now is to indeed find mechanisms and funding sources, of course, to ensure that scaling up can happen more often in Europe. There will always be innovators, and I don't think it's a problem per se, which will also be financed in the US. I think increasingly you see financing rounds of the US. You have venture capital, US venture capital, extremely active in Europe. I think that is certainly welcome. But you also increasingly see that the company, and in particular the research leg, if you want, of the company, stays in Europe. Because we have also over time now created a number of really powerful and broad ecosystems, I mean, largely around Europe's main cities, but not only, which of course can't rival Silicon Valley in size in absolute terms, but the network effect and the quality of the science base is very similar, and that allows the startups, even when financed out of Europe, to largely then also stay in Europe. So we want to encourage that. And we will, with the European Innovation Council, inspired by DARPA. And I sometimes say it's a bit like DARPA, just a bit better, but I will tell you why. Because not only do we want to have, like DARPA, program managers and be at the cutting edge of science and then connect that with innovation, but we will also have a funding instrument called the Accelerator, where we have already tested it for a year and a half, and where we had thousands of European companies coming for funding, and we provide grant funding of significant size, if justified, a few million euros. But we also, in many cases, and now an overwhelming majority of the requests are also about equity. So the European Innovation Council carries equity of Europe's innovation future. Again, not in isolation, it's also happening to a larger extent now in member states, but at a scale where the internal market and the level of funding is promising very impactful outcomes of that European Innovation Council support. I mean, in a nutshell, and if you maybe remember that, the European Research Council is our Nobel Prize factory. I do expect that the EIC maybe already is, but will certainly become Europe's unicorn factory as we move forward. And maybe one last comment on innovation. Of course, innovation can be done in different ways, and I think there will also be a European way, and including around the European Innovation Council, it will not be only about fast scaling up. We will also seek to support innovators which have solutions for our green and digital transformation. So if you want impact-driven innovation, is going to be very visible also in the European Innovation Council. Well, in that innovation part, you also have the Institute for Technology in Budapest, which I'm sure is known by many of you. So which we decided, of course, to continue. It is providing a lot of impact, in particular at connecting our universities, our industries, and our innovators at regional level, and therefore very, very impactful and complementary to the European Innovation Council. Mary, I think with that I've covered a bit of ground. Maybe I should just finish by saying that there are two features which I think are important for our American partners in the program, and colleagues will certainly develop them a bit further. I mean, the first one is that Horizon Europe will continue to promote open science. This is an agenda which is extremely important to Europeans, and which is a top priority for Commissioner Maria Gabriel and for her teams in DG Research and Innovation. Many of you probably know that we are one of the Plan S founders, and we have translated these commitments for open access publication in Horizon Europe. So if you participate in Horizon Europe, if you are funded under the program, you are then expected to make your publications immediately accessible, that they don't stay behind paywalls. I think during the pandemic, even journals which were not open access made these publications and even preprints largely available immediately, because in science, every day often really counts. So, of course, we will not prevent an ERC grantee, for example, to publish in Lancet or Nature. I don't think we should rule out that these publications also become open access at some point. We will, of course, not prohibit that. I think that would not make sense. But if a scientist decides to publish in these non-open access publications, he also will then have to make the peer-reviewed publication available on the first day in a repository with his university or research organization. We also created a repository around the European Commission, so that whilst the edited version is then in Nature, Lancet, and other high value publications, the research itself, the peer-reviewed result from the research, is accessible from day one. And in sync with that, we will also not fund anymore APC's article publication charges for non-open access journals. So if indeed you decide to publish in a non-open access publication, then these costs are to be borne by yourself or your institution. The program will not take them on. And the other dimension, and this will be a point of discussion in the panel, so I'm not going to dwell on it much, is to say that Europe's research, and the framework program, of course, as well, remains open to the world. We have no doubt that science, but also applied research and very often innovation, needs to be done in a global context. There are so many alliances which the US and Europe have launched in the Atlantic around infectious diseases, and there are many examples. They demonstrate that we need to work together globally. During the pandemic, we had that to an extent. We also had some nationalism. I think this is very visible in some cases. And we would very much want to reconfirm that we are absolutely keen to ensure that science remains a global endeavor. This does not mean that we can engage on a blanket basis. And this is why in Horizon Europe, we will want our partners to also agree on science values, the ones which are upheld in the US or in Europe. We will also be keen to have reciprocity. And there will be sometimes, and this has been a very high-profile discussion in Europe, so probably you had echoes of that also in the US. We will also, in some cases, decide that some research topics should be reserved to Europeans only, but this is going to be a handful of research topics in a mass of hundreds of research topics. So today that restriction applies, I think, to less than 2% of the work program as it stands today. And probably once we have worked out with our partners how even these topics could be relevant for them, I'm sure it will be even lower. So the message is we will remain an open partner. We believe that science needs this global open environment to flourish and provide the solutions to our green, digital, and recovery to be relevant for society. I finish here, Mary, and I hope I was kind of on time.
Thank you very much, Jean-Éric, for that tour de force, which gave us a very great overview of the 3 pillars of Horizon Europe and the clusters. And I should say something to our audience, which is that Jean-Éric, throughout his career, has always worked on the basis of co-creation and of involving citizens in the development of policies. And I think that he really brought this approach to the development of Horizon Europe, which is, I think, one of the reasons why there is so much focus on impact, and particularly through the missions, which we hope to see in the coming years. So thank you very much, Jean-Éric, for joining us. And may I thank also Ambassador Lambrinidis for his earlier presentation. Thank you, Stavros, for highlighting the principles and the priorities and indeed the challenges that the EU and the US have in common. So now it's my pleasure to move on to the next part of the event, which is the panel discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, who are all joining us from Brussels. So thank you very much, all of you. First, let me introduce Patrick Child. Patrick is the Deputy Director General for Research and Innovation, and his focus is on implementation, impact, and sustainable investment strategies. So quite a big portfolio. I have to say that Patrick is a warrior for international cooperation for the European Union. He is extremely active of major multilateral initiatives. In particular, I would point out that he is the chair of the steering group of Mission Innovation, which is a coalition of 24 countries and the European Union who are working together sorry, I got a bit of echo there, who are working together to develop affordable, clean energy technologies to help us move forward in combating climate change. Thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. Secondly, I'd like to introduce my compatriot, John Bell, who is the director responsible for Healthy Planet. And John's portfolio is also very broad. His portfolio in the Healthy Planet Directorate goes from biodiversity to the bioeconomy, climate change. But perhaps here in the United States, he is best known for his work on the Transatlantic Ocean Research Alliance, which is a very important initiative which has promoted over the last decade cooperation between the countries bordering the Atlantic, in particular with the United States and Canada, and developing our research on this extraordinary resource which we share, the Atlantic Ocean. So thank you for joining us, John. Then I'm happy to introduce Christina Russo. Christina is the Director for International Cooperation at the European Commission. And Christina has joined the Commission in 1992, and since she joined, she has held a number of diverse policy and management positions, ranging from consumer affairs to research and innovation, and of course, external relations and international cooperation. Thank you for joining us, Christina. The next panelist is Irene Norstedt. Irene is the Director for the People Directorate in DG Research and Innovation. And amongst the highlights of Irene's career so far has been that she was really instrumental in the development of the Innovative Medicines Initiative of the European Union. And indeed, she even served as its executive director for a while. And now she is the director in the People Directorate, which she'll tell us a little bit about later. Previously, she worked for a Swedish biotech company and at the Swedish Embassy in London. And last but by no means least, it's my pleasure to introduce Angela Liberatori, who is the head of the Science Department at the European Research Council, which, as Jean-Éric Paquet mentioned earlier, he considers his Nobel Prize factory. So no pressure, Angela. Angela has in addition to her role as the head of the science department, she has also in the last year co-chaired the social protection group for the UN research roadmap for COVID-19 recovery. And previously in her career, she was involved in the negotiations of the Kyoto Protocol on climate change. So thank you all very, very much for joining us here this morning. It's really a pleasure to have you. I would like to perhaps start the discussion and open with Christina to ask you, Christina, last week the European Commission unveiled a strategy for a global approach to international cooperation in research and innovation. And I'd like to ask you if you could perhaps give us some of the highlights of that new global approach and perhaps touch on some of the aspects that might be of particular relevance to the audience listening to us here today in the United States. Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mary, and good morning to everybody in the United States. Very happy as Director for International Cooperation to speak to such an audience. Yes, indeed, the European Commission adopted its strategy for international cooperation, its renewed strategy, the global approach to research and innovation. And our Director General, Jean-Éric Paquet, already mentioned some key elements of this strategy the fact that the strategy is open. We want to be open to the world. We want to allow participation to our international cooperation activities in research and innovation to all the key actors of science and innovation in the world. We will have some limitations only in some exceptional cases. And we also want to promote our values, our key values, and a system of cooperation based on reciprocity and level playing field with our international cooperation strategy and global approach. Now, what is important also and of relevance for the United States, as we will hear in the discussions that we will have, is that the pillar of this strategy is to reinforce the global alliances in the world, those global alliances which are important in order to promote our key priorities. My colleague John will speak about the Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. Patrick will speak about mission innovation. These are very important examples that are embedded in the strategy and in which the United States plays a leading role. And then also we want to promote through the strategy the cooperation with our key strategic partners in the world. And with no means, the United States is our biggest cooperation partner. I would like just to recall that the United States is the international partner with which we have the highest cooperation in the framework program. The US researchers were the ones that participated most in Horizon 2020. And I conclude these words on the global strategy by hoping that the United States will continue to be a very, very important partner for us, and that this seminar will shed the light on how to further increase the US participation in the Horizon Europe program, and thus contributing to developing together our global strategy for international cooperation in research and innovation.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina, for giving us that overview of the new strategy. And now I will start to open the floor to the other panelists and perhaps launch the discussion with I guess, a first question. If I could ask each of you to talk a little bit about the part of the program that the part of Horizon Europe that you're particularly responsible for, and talk a little bit about its objectives and what you're hoping to achieve. And perhaps I can start with John on this.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning to all our colleagues across the waters. So I'm responsible for what is called the cluster dealing with food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and environment. And what this is, it's the heart, if you like, of science driving the European Union's new raison d'etre, which is the Green Deal transformation to a climate neutral continent by 2050, working within its natural resources and in a fair and just way. So this part of the program is really the engine room of transformation on all things to do with nature and the environment, our oceans, our biodiversity. It has a 9 billion euro budget over the 7 years, 2 billion euros for the first 2 years, and it works on 7 destinations. You'll see that research innovation in Europe is now expected to set directions towards these targets that are there so that we can make this transition to a green and a healthy planet within the time frame. 7 destinations are, broadly speaking, around biodiversity and ecosystem services. This is not simply understanding biodiversity, but restoring, valuing, and working in particular on coastal marine biodiversity. Then we're looking at food systems, which has been a preoccupying element of our work for many years, from primary production to consumption, transformation of agriculture, fisheries, and aquaculture, and working to a more climate-friendly, sustainable food system as a whole. Our third destination is around the circular economy and bioeconomy sectors, dealing with important material flows and value chains of production, such as textiles, electronics, plastics, and construction. The key part of this economic transformation in Europe is to make the economy circular. Then we're working in a large way on cleaning the environment and zero pollution to halt pollution and prevent it in fresh and marine water, soils, and air. And then we have land, ocean, and water for climate action. Climate action is part of of this program in how we will apply it to the mitigation reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture and enhancing natural carbon sinks for climate change, including new approaches in water use. And last but not least, resilient, inclusive, healthy and green rural, coastal and urban communities, the fair and just transition to find ways in which we can develop a more included and sustainable and balanced development as these transitions unfold, and learn the lessons from previous time. This is supported by a big push. As Jean-Eric said, we have a green and digital transition to make on environmental observation, on digital solutions in support of the Green Deal, and on all that goes with that. And at the heart of all of this, of course, is our international cooperation, which has been and will remain a central part of how we work together with shared values to restore our shared planet in this shared space. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, John. Irene, would you like to give us an overview of your very broad portfolio?
Indeed. So thank you very much, Mary, and good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see you all this morning. So as the director for the People Directorate, I am responsible for a very broad range of areas as regards different aspects of people's life. That would be including health, social aspects, culture, and also security. Now, these areas are covered by 3 clusters under the Societal Challenges pillar of Horizon Europe. While all these clusters, of course, have their own objectives, and I will come to them very shortly, they all of them also support overarching objectives of climate change and the digitization of our societies. And as we are in the COVID-19 pandemic, these 3 clusters are also all actually contributing to deal with the different aspects of COVID pandemic, its consequences for the individuals, society as large. So let me start with my first cluster, cluster 1, which is the health cluster. And here the overarching goal is really to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal 3, to ensure healthy land, to promote the well-being for all at all ages, and also to support human rights. And this cluster is addressing 6 important areas, covering the full innovation cycle from basic research through translation and implementation into real-world settings, including healthcare settings. And we are focusing on the following priorities. So the first one is staying healthy in a right society. Second is living and working in a health-promoting environment. Then diseases and reducing the disease. Then ensuring innovative, sustainable, and high-quality healthcare. Number 5 is unlocking the full potential of new tools, technologies, and digital solutions for a healthy society. And last but not least, maintaining an innovative, sustainable, and globally competitive health-related industry. So we address all those areas through collaborative research in which we really want to see cross-disciplinary teams from both public and private sectors, and we very much want to strive to have end users participating in our research projects. That may be patient advocacy groups or healthcare providers or even health insurers, because we see that it's a really high value to have those in the research that we are funding. As Jan-Erik mentioned, we also work through partnerships. We have many partnerships in the health area, both with public and also private research funders. And we also work worldwide with other research funders, including with NIH, in many different areas. As examples, we can take rare diseases, antimicrobial resistance, and methodologies for risk assessments of chemicals and other areas. Jan-Erik also mentioned one of the proposed missions under Horizon Europe, which is in the area of cancer, where he also mentioned that aim to have 3 million lives saved, living longer and better by year 2030. I will rapidly move on to my second cluster, which is called Culture, Creativity and Inclusive Society. Here the focus is to provide policy options for socially and inclusive green and digital recovery. And the focus of the 3 distinct areas of this cluster is on democracy and governance. The second, European cultural heritage and the culture and creative industries. and last but not least, very importantly, social and economic transformations. And this cluster is also addressing societal impacts of the coronavirus pandemic with the objective to better understand and overcome the current crisis, increase the societal resilience and counter future crises of this kind. And I would also like to mention behavior, which is another really important cross-cutting aspect that we are looking at under this cluster. My third cluster concerns research and innovation on security aspects. And here under the umbrella of this cluster, research and innovation addresses first responders, society and policymakers to support research and innovation for evidence-based approaches to deal with threats such as terrorism, serious crime, and other security challenges like large-scale cybersecurity attacks. It also focuses on the protection and resilience of physical and digital infrastructures and of vital societal functions. New solutions for better integrated border management to better address irregular immigration and illegal movements of persons and goods. And last but not least, it also covers disaster management so that we better can predict, prevent, and deal with post-disaster aspects. Those risks could be natural or man-made. And concern the loss of life, harm to health and the environment, economic or material damage. So that was a very fast overview of the very broad portfolio that I have. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Irene. Certainly, I have heard from what you said and from what John said that there is a very large scope for cooperation transatlantically in these areas. Perhaps I could move on now to Patrick. Patrick, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about mission innovation and the efforts that the European Union and Horizon Europe in particular is making regarding energy research and innovation. Thank you.
Mary, I'm very happy to be here and very happy to welcome everyone to this event. And indeed, clean energy and research and innovation into clean energy is a very central part of the European Green Deal that John and others have presented. And it's also an area where research and innovation can produce very immediate and very valuable commercial and economic opportunities for innovators, scientists, and businesses around the world. And it's also, though, something that if we're to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement, the energy transition has got to be at the heart of all that we're doing. And that's why at the Paris COP, the Paris Conference in 2015, leaders came together very much driven by President Obama at the time with support of the Energy Secretary Moniz to launch Mission Innovation, which has subsequently developed as the leading sort of coalition of countries committed to significantly increasing their publicly funded investments into clean energy research and innovation, and to working in new and creative ways also with the private sector, recognizing that the clean energy transition is going to require massive public and private investments if we're to achieve the progress that we need on the required timescale. And so just as in the European program in Horizon Europe, we have a very significant budget allocated for clean energy research, something like 13 billion euros over the next 7 years, which represents, I think, something like a 50% increase on what we had in our previous program. That we are really determined in this spirit of being open to the world to engage with international partners through a multilateral fora like Mission Innovation, as well as bilaterally on different topics. And so I'm very excited that next week, hosted by Chile, unfortunately in a virtual format, we will have the next Mission Innovation ministerial gathering, meeting alongside the Clean Energy Ministerial. And we're really delighted that the new Biden-Harris administration is so strongly committed to the agenda of mission innovation, and indeed has proposed that next year's ministerial meeting will be hosted in the United States, and we're obviously very much looking forward to that. So what is mission innovation? Well, we're about to embark on a new exciting phase where we will essentially be doing three things. Firstly, working together on some headline goals, missions, where we see a particular opportunity for global collaboration. And the three topics that will emerge from the meeting next week will be hydrogen, a topic where we will be leading with Chile, with Australia and other countries. We hope that the United States as well will come on board. There will be a focus on the power sector and how to integrate renewables, and in particular taking account of the intermittent nature of renewables into the grid system using new digital technologies, and also looking at some of the hard to abate sectors, starting with shipping and long distance shipping. And can we think of the energy solutions for long distance shipping that provide clean alternatives to fossil fuels? And there too, we're very happy to see the United States stepping up to take a lead alongside one of our member states, Denmark. So that first thematic dimension of mission innovation. We will then have, secondly, intensified sort of peer review of our respective policies. And there, this is around national clean energy innovation pathways, very much an idea that the new US administration has brought to the table and which we have embraced very strongly. And I'm looking forward to seeing the sort of learnings that we will get from that and the opportunities that we will be able to identify to work together through these sort of new collaborations. And thirdly, a renewed focus on outreach to the private sector and trying to build bridges for public-private financing, which will help us to multiply the all too scarce public funding that we have for research and innovation. And there we're working with organizations like Breakthrough Energy, the Coalition of Investors led by Bill Gates, the Rocky Mountain Institute, the World Economic Forum, and various other global organizations which are bring together business leaders to see what we can do together. And so that in a nutshell is what we are trying to do with mission innovation. But we are very, very pleased that European leadership on the climate debate over the past years has also been matched with a sort of leading role on mission innovation, the clean energy agenda. And we're really delighted that in the last months we've seen renewed enthusiasm and engagement with our American colleagues under the new administration, and we therefore very optimistic for a significant uplift in our cooperation in these important topics in the climate debate. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I will now ask Angela if she could tell us a little bit about the European Research Council and the exciting opportunities that it offers. Thank you, Angela. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary, and it's a great pleasure to be in this event. As a little biographical note that links me to the US, I was during my PhD times working in a big team funded by the MacArthur Foundation on climate and other environmental issues. And then as a postdoc, I was hosted by the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard with the Fulbright Fellowship. So I'm totally convinced that the transatlantic research cooperation is very good for all of us. And when I came back to Europe, instead of following the brain drain outside tendency in my own country, Italy, I was really committed to continue to work in this. Now, apart from the small incipit, because at the end I will speak more specifically about ERC and the US. What is ERC? First of all, ERC is a very simple idea and a very simple program. With the 16 billions that are allocated to ERC in Horizon Europe for the period 21-27, we will continue to foster frontier research. Frontier research simply means the research that pushes the frontiers of knowledge in any area of science. We are a little bit like the NSF, but we include also the humanities, which are not included there. So really the whole science approach, as our scientific council calls it. And we do that by letting the researchers, the scientists themselves, choose the topics, methods, and ideas that they think could lead to a breakthrough of knowledge in, again, any field of science. So you don't have to memorize topics and where you could fit better. Just start with your ideas and submit it. And in doing this, we make sure that the ideas are evaluated across different panels in, let's say, 3 clusters of scientific endeavor: physical sciences and engineering, which has 11 evaluation panels or clusters. Nine are devoted to life sciences, and 7 are devoted to social sciences and humanities. And of course, we have also applications and grantees that across the boards between physics and whatever sociology, or between psychology and biology, and so on and so forth. So the idea is that the ideas are submitted and evaluated with the only criterion of scientific excellence, of both the track record of the principal investigator who submits the idea, and which of course will have a team around her or him or them, and with regard to the excellence of the ideas, the proposal itself, in indeed pursuing breakthrough in the knowledge we have. There is, of course, an important notion about impact that I think it's worth explaining. ERC doesn't ask scientists who apply to ERC to demonstrate ex ante any other possible impact than the one on science. But as we all know, without good science, you cannot have a good impact also on policy, economy, and society. And we have, as Jean-Éric Paquet mentioned earlier, we have many examples of ERC grantees who got the grant because of the novelty and the breakthrough capacity of their ideas, and of course came out with other impact, including economic, social, and policy that are quite important, and thanks to the importance of their ideas. The evaluation panels of ERC are selected by our scientific council, which is itself composed of 22 eminent scientists, led for the time being by Professor Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, a mathematician. And we are in the process of about to welcome a new president sometimes soon during this year. The grants which are provided by ERC are also very simple. They follow the life science of the life cycle, if you like, of the scientist. 2/3 of the budget of ERC is devoted to younger scientists. We have the starting grants for researchers 2 to 7 years after PhD, and consolidator grants between 8 and 12 years from PhD, and then advanced grants for the more, let's say, established scholars with a track record of at least 10 years. Those are all individual grants. We also have the synergy grants, where 2 to 4 principal investigators can join forces from the same institution and country, or from different institutions and countries, to put together their force for particularly ambitious areas of research and endeavor that they wish to pursue. So those are not consortia, but a team of researchers who really need to complement each other expertise to pursue these important ideas. And for all of those grants, we also have a smaller grant which is called proof of concept, which is basically about proving the possible commercial but also social innovation potential of the ideas that our grantees are pursuing. And this is also becoming now a link with the European Innovation Council that Jean-Éric Paquet also mentioned. Now, this is about ERC. What about ERC and the US? Well, first of all, the ERC signed with the National Science Foundation the first implementing arrangement out of 11 we have now with the partners across the world. This covers again all the areas of science that both council are covering, and this means that there are fellows coming from the US to visit ERC grantees in their universities, labs, and so on and so forth. So this is something that across the many years have been involving many scientists on both sides. We also have US nationals who have been deciding, thanks to the fact that in ERC you can have a double affiliation and the only requirement is to spend at least 50% of the time in Europe, and depending on the grants, starting consolidator or advanced, a certain percentage of the time specifically to the grant. So with this dual affiliation, we have actually already 364 US nationals who are ERC grantees, which means they are working at least a good part of their time in a European host institution, I should say in Europe, European Union, or in the countries associated to the European Union. Likewise, we have, of course, many grantees who have been visiting US institutions during the time of the grant or conducting field work in the US. So we hope, of course, that after celebrating the 10,000 grantee of ERC, as Jerry Paquet reminded, we might celebrate, I don't know, the 500 grantees, for example, coming from the US. That would be an interesting target. Anyhow, it could be nice to have a great number of scholars from the US who would like to join ERC and make this cooperation even stronger and fruitful in pursuing frontier research across the board. As it was said, the framework program remains open to the world, and ERC is definitely pushing the frontiers of knowledge across any of the borders on our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and particularly thank you for pointing out the relevance to this US audience of the ERC, for which, of course, anybody of any nationality, including our US audience, can apply. And by the way, you didn't mention that the grants are very generous as well as being very prestigious. So I'll just add that there. Perhaps I could now ask the other panelists who have already described a little bit what you're doing in your area of Horizon Europe, perhaps to mention one or two areas where there's particular relevance for perhaps our US audience, priorities perhaps where you will be looking for particularly international cooperation, and where European researchers might be able to include US researchers in their consortia. Perhaps I could start with John on this one. John?
Thanks, Mary, and apologies. I had some plugs that were not working here, so if my shoulder was the main thing in shot, that was what it was about. So look, we're competing for friendship here. We have 1,000 research teams working together in the Atlantic. So the All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance, and what we will do to build on that, will be a huge area of cooperation with our friends and colleagues in the United States, where we're working with NOAA, NASA, NSF, Navy, and other actors. There's also huge opportunities to work in polar research. We're working on creating, from pole to pole, an all-Atlantic ocean research community. Linked to that, I think Jean-Ric mentioned the moonshot missions, or in these cases, Earthshot missions, where we'll be developing a huge initiative to have a restoration of our oceans and seas by 2030, with a big focus on demonstration in the Atlantic. And also when we work on the climate resilience of Europe in climate adaptation, there'll be many opportunities there, as indeed in the soil restoration mission. In the International Bioeconomy Forum, there's a large number of areas of work. We're working intergovernmentally with many areas and with different organizations on green growth research topics, Precision food systems, I think, is one where we've had a lot of discussions with our colleagues in USDA and other research agencies there. And the microbiome, which of course is the next big thing, where there's a lot of activity in the US as part of the microbiome strategy there, and the work that needs to be done to turn this into the new genome sequence revolution for science. On climate science, we're also working on the support to the IPCC and the IPBES on biodiversity. And again, it'll be great on Earth systems where there's huge cooperation going on. Patrick Child, one of his roles there is on the global Earth observation systems. We have a number of Earth systems working with the European Space Agency and with our counterparts across in the US in terms of building the capability to predict and project the changes to natural and socioeconomic drivers. So I'll stop there because there are so many areas where we are cooperating and will cooperate. But I think all are very much welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you also for being brief, because of course time is against us as always in these events. Irene, perhaps you could briefly tell us some of the highlights of your areas of research, which might be of particular interest to the US here.
So indeed, Mary, and I mean, health is an area that lends itself very well, of course, to cooperation internationally. And I would like to mention maybe two areas, one which is very close to my heart, and that is the area of rare diseases, where we are working very closely together in something we call the International Consortium for Rare Diseases, where we are actually together with NIH launched this consortium, and now we have partners from all continents working together, because there are 6,000 to 8,000 different rare diseases, and some of them are really rare. There may be only one or two persons in a country who have such a disease, and therefore the cooperation together is really something a must. And there are so many aspects in the rare diseases. I mean, first of all is of course to understand the disease, diagnose the onset of the disease, and then of course to find a therapy or an appropriate therapeutic path for all those living with the rare diseases. Of course, there are also social aspects of those living with a rare disease, and there is so much work that we can do together in this area. So I think that is it's an area that lends itself, naturally to cooperation, and we already have a very well-established cooperation. I would say most of the NIH institutes are participating in this cooperation that we have. So I think it's an area that I really plea for cooperation in. So I really welcome you as participants in the research that we are funding as well. The other area, which I think is a really important area, it was urgent and important already before COVID, but it has even demonstrated further the need for research, and that is on antimicrobial resistance. This is another big global challenge which can really be devastating for humans worldwide. So we have different aspects. I mean, one is the race to find new antimicrobials, because we know there are increased resistance to those that are being used. We also need to work more on the social aspects and in how antimicrobials are being used, trying to reduce its use as much as possible, trying to find alternative methodologies, etc. So for me, that is another incredibly important global challenge that we really need to work together on to find solutions to. So to keep it short, I will stay on those two areas.
Thank you very much, Irene, because I know there's so much you could say, but thank you for keeping it short. So perhaps finally, I will ask Patrick if he could tell us a little bit more about the opportunities for cooperation in energy research through Horizon Europe. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And I will be brief as well. But I mean, there is a huge amount of alignment between the priorities that we have under Horizon Europe for the European Research and Innovation Programme and what we see coming from the research communities in the United States, whether it's on renewables, hydrogens, batteries and long-term energy storage, heating and cooling, energy efficiency in buildings, and the broader question of sector integration. How do we make a modern energy system work better together, bringing all its moving parts together? Just highlight two specific dimensions. Under mission innovation, I already mentioned the missions that we are preparing together on hydrogen and on shipping. But there are also further missions in preparation, which may be launched later in the year at the COP. And so we're talking, for example, with the US administration and the DOE colleagues in particular about a carbon capture and storage mission or direct air capture. Also, we have some ideas on the energy system in cities specifically, where I think there's a lot to learn also from things that are happening in the States. And there is a growing discussion on heavy industry, hard to abate sectors, and how that links into the bioeconomy. So a lot of interesting work ahead of us in mission innovation. Also, just to conclude, I'd just like to highlight the existing very strong collaboration that there is between our in-house science service, the Joint Research Centre, and some of the Department of Energy labs, with collaborations in a whole range of issues from electric vehicles, smart grids, photoelectrics, and energy efficiency. And I think that there's a lot to build on there. And as I said before, the renewed commitment of the new administration on the whole climate agenda, I think, gives us a really powerful political impulse to the work that we're doing together. And I'm very much looking forward to the meeting of ministers and leaders next week for Mission Innovation, where we will have Climate Envoy John Kerry, Secretary Granholm, but also from the European Commission, Vice President Timmermans and Commissioner Gabriel, setting, I think, a common framework with other world leaders, the main players on clean energy innovation in mission innovation, setting us a really challenging agenda for the next decade of innovation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. We're running a little bit short on time, but I did want to get to some of the audience questions because we received a lot of audience questions, both before the event and during the event. So perhaps we can, I can throw out a few questions to you, and hopefully you'll be able to answer relatively briefly. Let me just get to some of these questions. Perhaps the first one is for Christina. Christina, a frequent question is, how can US researchers actually get involved in Horizon Europe?
Thank you, Mary. We heard that the program is open. We heard that the US is researchers are the biggest participant from a country outside Europe. And how can they get involved? There are basically 4 ways to get involved. First, the US researchers can team up with the EU researchers in preparing and submitting proposals in calls and topics, basically in all the work program. The second way to get involved is that US research organizations, individually or organized, can participate to a partnership which is funded by the EU. And this can be the result of a bottom-up initiative, or could also be stimulated through Horizon Europe via what we call the twinning initiatives or coordinated calls organized with the US funders. Third possibility for the US researchers is to participate in the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, which support 2 ways mobility and the institutional partnering between the EU and US universities and research organizations. And last but not least, and we heard, is the participation in multilateral initiatives such as the All Atlantic Initiative and Mission Innovation, about which we already spoke.
Thank you very much, Christina. I see that there is another question asking whether or not we partner with US government agencies. I think that our speakers have all actually dealt with that, because there is a lot of cooperation with the NSF, with the NIH, with NOAA, with Department of Energy, with NIH, of course. So perhaps I won't open that one to the panel in the interests of time. Another question concerns intellectual property rights. Perhaps, Patrick, would you like to address the situation regarding intellectual property rights in Horizon Europe funded projects?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, the intellectual property in the end remains with the sponsor of the program, but we have a very active policy on open access, and we encourage sort of open access publications, as Jean-Eric was saying also in his introductory remarks. And so the fact that US participants in our programs would also benefit from intellectual property is fine. Of course, you would bring your own funding, and so that's also part of the equation. And I mean, apart from very, very exceptional cases where there are particular sort of security or other sensitivities surrounding the results of the projects, we are very keen to include international partners as widely as possible. But the intellectual property produced in the project stays the property of the beneficiary.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That's very helpful. And what you mentioned there about funding actually segues nicely into another question which we received. Are US researchers eligible for funding? It's a question with several answers, so maybe I'll start with Christina. Maybe Christina would like to give the first element of the answer, and then I'll move quickly to Irene and Angela.
Thank you, Mary. Very briefly, the EU researchers and research organizations in general will not be eligible for funding under Horizon Europe, as it was the case for Horizon 2020, and as it is the case for all participants from industrialized countries and from the BRICS. There are only some specific cases where the US research organization can get funded, and this is, in generally speaking, in very exceptional cases when their participation is deemed necessary for developing the projects. And then there are other cases in specific sectors, and there I pass the floor to Irene.
So thank you. So indeed, we have done an agreement with NIH. Our health research program is open. Also, we are funding all types of US entities that are participating. And that also means that the NIH is opening and also funds European participants in the NIH program. So in the area of health research and cluster 1, we are also indicating in every work program that so that it's very clear, there's no ambiguity, that we are also funding all US partners in those projects that are selected for funding. So I hand over to Angela.
Thank you, Irene. Well, again, we need to distinguish people, individuals, and organizations. So Christina and Irene were mainly speaking about institutions, organizations. I will mainly focus on individuals. So first of all, as it was mentioned several times, Horizon Europe is open to scientists from all over the world. European research is not nationalistic. We do not mind the nationality of the scientists. They are all welcome to participate. But when they are beneficiary, if they want to be a beneficiary of European funding, they are expected to be in Europe and with European host institution at least part of the time to be eligible. This applies also for ERC. As I mentioned, we have US national being ERC grantees because this means they choose to be part of their time or fully their time, depending. We have both cases to work in Europe in one of the institutions in the European Union and associated countries. And this applies to all the main grants. In the case of the Synergy grant, where I mentioned we have 2 to 4 principal investigators, One of them can be also hosted outside the European Union and associated country. And we have a number of grants where one of the partners to a synergy grant is hosted in the US. Well, maybe in that case, they are not US nationals, but whatever, European, African, or Asian nationals working in the US. So again, to detach nationality and the place of the host institution. So there are all those possibilities, which I think make it quite interesting for interested researchers in the US and other parts of the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a number of other questions, but I'm afraid that in the interests of time, I'm going to have to move on. I would like to ask Christina if she would perhaps make some closing remarks to wrap up our event today. Thank you, Christina. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you to all the participants for having been listening to this event. Thanks to all my colleagues for having participated. I think that, as it was clearly said both by Ambassador Lambridis and by the Director General Jean-Éric Paquet, we do share values between the EU and the US. We also have a very good track record of cooperation. We said, and I repeated several times, that the US is the first international partner in Horizon Europe. In Horizon, it was in Horizon 2020, and we hope we will be in Horizon Europe too. What I would like to say also, as Patrick and other colleagues also mentioned, is that we have also renewed our geopolitical relations with the new US administration. This is something which is very important for the European Union, and there is a summit which is going to take place very soon. So we have the political willingness, and as we heard, we have with Horizon Europe the means to really further enhance the very good cooperation that we have in research and innovation. And I believe that the EU and the US together, they can do a lot in order to build a better world in which there is a growing scientific knowledge, in which we will be able to better tackle the societal challenges, and the scientific and technological development will be built on our common and shared values. So with that, I would like to thank you all for the participation and encourage to participate to the seminar and to the Horizon Europe program, which we have been launching with this event today.